Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matt here, and yeah, as you guys have probably seen already, the next mini set coming to Pokemon Pocket has just been announced. That is A3B, otherwise known as Eevee Grove. So as the name implies, this is a mini set focused primarily around Eevee and all of the Eeveelution cards. And I'm actually really excited about this. Very quick turnaround, honestly, from when ED Crisis was released about 3 weeks ago today. This set is set to release on June 26th, so we've got about 7-8 days from today. And, you know, before the set officially releases, I'm sure we're going to get a lot more information about all of the cards that are coming in the set, but for now, we did get the trailer video, which if you haven't seen it, go check it out. In that trailer video, we got a bunch of new cards that were kind of showcased, so today we're going to go through all of the cards that were shown, talk about them from a strategic perspective, maybe provide some insight. I know some people were maybe kind of a little bit curious as to kind of what these cards meant. Some of the abilities and the texts on these cards can be a little bit confusing, so we're going to get into it. I'm actually really excited about this. I think that Eevee sets always come out in the official Pokemon TCG. They're always, you know, coming around, and people are really excited about them. They're really popular from a collector's perspective, so I think they're going to be really fun to open these packs in Pokemon Pocket. However, a lot of these cards are actually really good from a strategic perspective, and I think that it is actually going to change the metagame around a lot. So let's dive right into it, guys. Let's take a look at these cards. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and comment below what you think about all of these new cards and anything that we cover in this video. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. If I miss anything, or if I get anything maybe incorrect or wrong, feel free to comment down below and let me know. But anyway, let's dive right into it. So the primary card from this set, I think, is going to be, of course, Eevee EX. Now, this is definitely something that I think some people were questioning a little bit. They maybe didn't fully understand what this card was. Let's break it down. So this is a basic EX Pokemon, the lowest amount of HP that we've gotten from any EX Pokemon in the game, perhaps by far the weakest EX Pokemon. This is still going to be worth 2 points if your opponent KOs it. However, because this is Eevee EX, it technically is a different card than any of the other Eevee cards that we've gotten previously. So if you didn't know that, in Pokemon Pocket, theoretically speaking, you're only allowed to run 2 copies of any Pokemon or any card in your deck. However, EX cards for a particular Pokemon are actually different cards than, you know, the same Pokemon card that's not an EX. So theoretically speaking, what I'm kind of getting at is that we can play basically 4 copies total of Eevee in our deck, whether it's, you know, a normal Eevee, 2 copies of whatever one we're playing, and then Eevee EX. So effectively speaking, we can play 4 copies of Eevee in our deck. And this Eevee here, like I said, 90 HP, colorless. It can bite for 30 damage for 1 energy, which I guess is somewhat relevant. I mean, that's the same type of attack as like Palkia EX has for 1 energy, but it has the ability here, Eevee Evolve, I think is what this ability is called. This reads that this Pokemon can evolve into any Pokemon that evolves from Eevee. If you play it from your hand onto this Pokemon cannot evolve during your first turn or the turn that you play it. So some people, again, were a little bit curious what this really meant. It's just sort of standard evolution. Why is it in the form of an ability? Well, basically, we've never had an EX Pokemon that can evolve before, and that's really kind of the whole point of Eevee, is that it is an EX Pokemon. As a basic Pokemon with 90 HP, it's actually quite strong. It should be able to survive multiple different attacks. So volley is something that we're a little bit afraid of, for sure, being, you know, KO'd on turn 2 and your opponent taking 2 prize cards. So it's actually a little bit scary to have such a low HP Pokemon worth 2 prizes. But theoretically speaking, this is 2 more copies of Eevee that we can play into our deck and then evolve not only into any of the other Eeveelution cards that are either EX Pokemon, but also the Eeveelution Pokemon that aren't EX Pokemon. So that's, I think, the main reason why we have an ability here. Somebody in the Discord did let us know about like Pikachu EX as an example. You can't evolve Pikachu EX into like a Raichu card or Raichu EX, so it doesn't work like that. That's why they have the ability here for Eevee, is that basically any card that, you know, Eevee would evolve into, whether it's like Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon, or Glaceon, or Leafeon EX or non-EX, you can evolve this particular Eevee EX into any of those cards. So it's actually quite interesting. The ability to evolve an EX Pokemon into a non-EX Pokemon is certainly pretty cool. I do think that with all of the Eeveelution cards that have been released in the game so far, and all of the, of course, Eeveelution cards that are coming, when I say Eeveelution, of course, I mean just evolution Pokemon that evolve from Eevee. That's, I think, a common term, I'm not sure, but it's interesting because basically the ability to play 4 copies of any Eevee in your deck and then potentially play 4 copies of some of the Eeveelution cards does kind of make this stage 1 type strategy a little bit more consistent than we've ever had in Pokemon Pocket before. We've never, and I mean like literally, this is the first time in Pokemon Pocket where we're technically able to run like a 4-4 evolution line, which theoretically should make this very consistent, right? Playing 4 copies of a basic Pokemon with all of the different ways in Pokemon that can evolve into it allows us to be pretty consistent in terms of our ability to get a Stage 1 Pokemon evolved, right? Because there's so many targets for a basic Pokemon, right? We're always starting with an Eevee, and then you can play up to like 4 copies of it. And there is, like we have things like, currently right now, I believe we only have Leafeon and Glaceon currently that are EX Pokemon that evolve from Eevee, but we also have non-EX versions of those cards that are coming out. So basically you could play 4 copies of Eevee and then 4 copies of like a Flareon or 4 copies of Leafeon or Glaceon or Sylveon or whatever it is. And then that's pretty consistent because theoretically speaking, you're playing a 4-4 line, which we've never really been able to do before. So should make the deck pretty consistent. But anyway, that's what Eevee really does. So we'll play 2 copies of Eevee, probably in a deck with 2 copies of, non-Eevee EX. And then, yeah, we'll just sort of be able to be a little bit more consistent than really any other Stage 1 Pokemon has been before, which is definitely quite interesting. So that's really the whole point with Eevee EX, is that it's just 2 extra copies of Eevee that we can play in our deck. Yes, if you get KO'd, your opponent still takes 2 prize cards. We don't have a lot of HP, so it's a little bit scary. But from a consistency standpoint, it's very, very interesting. The ability here doesn't really do anything other than just allow you to evolve this particular EX card, which again is pretty cool because we've never had that before in Pokemon Pocket. Now, we probably are getting a lot more, I guess, like cards in the set than we've gotten announced so far, so keep that in mind. Right now, as far as, evolution cards that are EX cards, we only have 2 of them showcased here in the trailer. That is, of course, Flareon and Sylveon, which are 2 very, very strong cards. And as we see for non-EX evolution cards, we have a new Leafeon, a new Vaporeon, Glaceon, Jolteon, Espeon, and Umbreon, which we'll all take a look at here in this particular video. But next up, let's take a look at Flareon, because this is one that I'm actually really curious about. So Flareon is, of course, a Stage 1 Fire-type EX Pokemon, and it evolves from Eevee. Like I said, we can evolve from a normal Eevee or Eevee EX, so, theoretically speaking, very consistent. We do have a Flareon that's not an EX card that is actually quite similar, but, we'll have to see whether or not the main way we play these particular Eevee cards is to play like a 4-4 line, or maybe we just sort of play like 2 different evolutions with an Eevee card. We'll have to see. It's definitely interesting, but Flareon EX has 150 HP, weak to water, retreat cost of 2. Now, as a Stage 1 Pokemon, 150 is actually a decent amount. I know that there are some basic EX Pokemon with 150. Guzzlord has 170, and it's a basic, but 150 is a pretty decent number for a Stage 1 Pokemon. Executor, for example, back in the day had 160, so 150 is definitely a decent amount of HP, but this Pokemon here, Flareon EX, has a really strong ability, Combust, which reads that once during your turn, you may attach a fire energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon, and if you do, deal 20 damage to this Pokemon. So it accelerates fire energies from your discard pile to yourself, which is pretty cool. I believe there's a lot of fire-type Pokemon in the game that discard energies after they attack, so whether this is like an early game attacker or like a late game attacker, we should be able to kind of get this set up pretty quickly. Its attack here, Fire Spin, does 130 damage for 3 energies, and then you discard 2 fire energies from this Pokemon. So yes, we are discarding 2 energies from Flareon, but because of its ability, we should be able to attack turn after turn by using the ability Combust to attach one of those energies from the discard pile, and then we can manually attach to Flareon for the turn, so that's attaching 2 per turn to Flareon, effectively allowing us to attack for 130 every turn. However, we're not able to, go positive on energies every turn. We're just kind of breaking even, so we're not able to set up a second Pokemon that effectively, so keep that in mind. But Flareon EX doing 130 every turn for virtually kind of no drawback is quite strong. 150 HP. I think that this is a really decent kind of tempo fire Pokemon that we don't really have, in the format. Basically, the fire type, in my mind, has been really all about like Charizard since the very beginning. Arcanine saw a little bit of play. Of course, Blaine's was a deck back in the day which was more aggressive and fast-paced, but realistically, all fire type decks for quite some time now have been mostly about kind of like setup and sweep decks, like whether it was the old Charizard with Moltres or the new, the new Charizard now with the Stoke Charizard. That's really all the fire type archetypes have been in the metagame for quite some time. So this sort of tempo version of a fire type EX Pokemon is kind of appealing to me. We are also hitting for weakness on a variety of Pokemon. Buzzwole is the most common card in the game right now, the most common deck. So hitting for weakness against Buzzwole, hitting for 150 is pretty relevant. And of course, we do have extra damage modification cards that we can play with Flareon to potentially consistently instantly do, get a one-hit KO on Buzzwole, which is pretty cool. So I think that Flareon actually has quite a bit of potential. Like I said, a decent amount of HP, a decent amount of damage, stage 1 Pokemon, but we're playing 4 copies of Eevee. We can even play 2 copies of the small Flareon. So I actually quite like this card. I think it's pretty decent. We'll have to see. What I am also expecting is that similar to like Triumphant Light or ED Crisis, we're probably going to get some like Eevee specific like enabling cards, like support cards basically, whether it's trainers or Pokemon that increase the viability of these cards. I think a lot of people always, when mini sets come out, think that the cards aren't very good because they don't have the full context. We don't have the full set list, so we don't know all of the cards that are coming in the set. And then once the set releases, there's inevitably some broken cards that all pair together and make these strategies really strong. So I'm expecting something like that. We can't forget what ED Crisis was like when it was announced. I think a lot of people thought the cards were really bad, and then they ended up all being some of the best cards in the entire game. So I'm not saying that's probably or definitely what's going to happen with this set. But one thing I will say is that all of the cards we're taking a look at today are probably going to be a bit better than we expect them to be, just because we don't have the full set list yet, we don't have the full context, so keep that in mind. But yeah, Flareon EX, very, very cool. And I think it's actually going to be quite good. I'm just excited about a potentially more tempo kind of based fire type archetype that's like not like a mid-range setup and sweep Charizard deck, because I get a little bit tired of fire being kind of the same type deck every format. But anyway, there's Flareon. Next up is Sylveon, which in my mind is probably one of the most interesting cards from this entire set, at least that's been announced so far. So Sylveon, stage 1, psychic type Pokemon, no fairy types in the game so far yet, but it is a psychic type. Retreat cost of 1, it's weak to metal type, and it has the ability Happy Ribbit. This ability reads, once during your turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may draw 2 cards. This is incredibly strong. This is absolutely ridiculous. So basically the best card in Pokemon Pocket is Professor's Research. It's played in every deck. It's a supporter card that allows you to draw 2 cards. Now we have a Pokemon that its ability basically procs when you evolve it, and you get to draw 2 cards. So in decks playing Sylveon, you effectively do have 4 copies of Professor's Research, which is definitely quite strong. We're going to be able to move through our deck very, very quickly. Now Sylveon with 140 HP isn't like the strongest Pokemon in the game. We can attack for 70 damage with Fairy Wind for 1 Psychic and 1 Colorless, so you can attack with Sylveon, but it's probably just going to be a card that you throw into your deck, to kind of move through your deck a little bit more quickly. We'll have to see if this ability is broken, but we'll have to see if it's even worth playing Sylveon. 70 damage for 2 energies, I guess, isn't terrible, but not really that relevant. We're not even 2-KOing a lot of Pokemon in the game, so yeah, I think Sylveon's ability is absolutely insane. There are some other Psychic-type cards, as we saw, like with Espeon and stuff, that, of course, we can pair with it. We have Giratina. We have a lot of really strong Psychic-type cards. We also have Shiinotic. So I was kind of joking about this in the Discord today. Like, theoretically speaking, playing 2 copies of Professor's Research, playing your Pokeballs, playing Sylveon, and then playing Shiinotic in your deck, you have the potential to literally draw like 10 cards out of your deck in a single turn, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. So I know Shiinotic also seems a little bit similar, where it's like, is it really worth playing the 4 cards in our deck to get that extra effect? But what we saw, again, with things like Solgaleo and in a variety of different decks like Magnezone right now, it is actually pretty worth it to play Shiinotic. Although I do think Shiinotic maybe is a little bit better of an effect, not being an EX Pokemon, while also having like more of a targeted search effect than Sylveon's just drawing 2. But theoretically speaking, this is a very, very strong Pokemon that could see a lot of play in a variety of different Psychic decks. I think that Sylveon is going to be pretty good. I don't know if we are going to pair it with Shiinotic, because that's like 8 Pokemon in total, but tons of card draw. Like I said, we have other strong Psychic Pokemon in the game. I wouldn't be surprised to see Sylveon EX be relevant in the metagame. It's just hard for us to really tell exactly where or how we're going to end up playing this. Like I said, the attack is pretty weak. The Pokemon in general isn't like super strong or anything, but the ability is absolutely crazy. You could evolve 2 Sylveon in 1 turn, I believe, and draw 4 cards. The effect here is interesting because it says once during your turn, you may play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, but that's obvious, right? We can't like evolve and then de-evolve and then re-evolve in the same turn, right? So that to me reads like it's once per Sylveon to draw 2 cards. Typically cards that are locked like as an effect once per turn, in general, read that like they usually say you can only use this effect once per turn, which is a little bit of a different wording. So we'll have to see. It's a little bit like, subjective as to how they've worded these cards to know exactly how the effect will work. To me, the way that this reads is that we can evolve Sylveon 2 different times with 2 different Sylveons in 1 turn and draw 4 cards. That's how I'm reading this, but that might not be the case, so keep that in mind. We'll have to just kind of wait and see, but in my mind, if it was locked to just once per turn in total, it would have said that you could only use Happy Ribbon effect once per turn. That's typically what we see in those types of effects, so I'm assuming we can evolve Sylveon twice, 2 different Sylveons in 1 turn and draw 4 cards, which is effectively really, really broken. And again, with Shiinotic being able to search out Sylveons from your deck, it is a little bit crazy. So we'll have to see if Sylveon sees that much play as a sort of a supportive Pokemon. Any kind of a draw effect in Pokemon Pocket is really strong, as we've seen with things like Solgaleo and Shiinotic, so I kind of like it. I really do. I think that this card could be really good. The effect is insane, and yeah, Sylveon. So that's it for like the EX cards so far that we've been shown. Like I said, the mini sets typically have like, I think 6 or 7 EX cards, so I think we probably have like 3 or 4 more EX cards that have yet to be shown yet. I assume they're going to be pretty strong. Again, we can't forget about like Shining Revelry. The set in general was like kind of random, but then Giratina EX was thrown into that set, and we all know how broken Giratina EX is, so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised. There were some rumors about like a Zeraora EX immersive card being shown at like an airport somewhere or something, so maybe we do end up getting that Zeraora EX. Again, we'll have to see. We don't know yet, but definitely assume that there's going to be probably 3 or 4 more EX cards coming in the mini set that we've yet to see so far. However, we do have a bunch of other cards that aren't EX Pokemon that are evolution cards, and I think some of them are actually quite decent. So let's go ahead, take a look at those, and yeah, well, you know, we'll see what I think about them. First up is going to be Leafeon. So we do, I believe, have a small Leafeon and a Leafeon EX already. So this is just another non-EX Leafeon card. 90 HP, again, stage 1, retreat cost of 1, weak to fire. For 1 colorless energy, that's something important to keep in mind. For 1 colorless energy, we do Leaf Blast. This attack does 20 damage for each grass energy attached to this Pokemon. So yeah, it's a colorless energy at its attack cost, but basically its damage scales by only grass energies attached to it. Now, Leafeon EX does generate grass energies. It's not really something that's ever been really meta, and I don't think this effect is very similar to Celebi. I just don't think it's going to be as good of a card as Celebi. 90 HP means we're going to get Revenge KO'd very easily. Yes, with Leaf Cape, we can go to 120, but, you know, again, that's basically the same as like Celebi, and, you know, Celebi is, yeah, an EX Pokemon worth 2 prize cards, but Celebi in general, I think, is just a better Pokemon here than Leafeon, but there is some merit. Again, the ability to be playing multiple Leafeon in the same deck, like, again, you could play 4 copies of Leafeon technically and 4 copies of an Eevee, and they all kind of mix and match however you kind of want them to, which is, again, pretty strong from a consistency standpoint. But this Leafeon card is interesting. Theoretically speaking, later in the game, we can do a lot of damage, but if our opponent KOs any one of our Pokemon, it's going to be pretty easy for them to, you know, get rid of those grass energies. So, yes, there is some inherent synergy here with Leafeon EX. I just don't know if Leafeon EX and the small Leafeon is going to be like a good archetype or a better archetype. People have already tried to play Leafeon with Celebi, and it was never really a meta deck or a meta strategy, so I don't really know if this Leafeon will kind of prove to be any better than that. You could play it with Superior, like I said, similar to Celebi, and that'll probably end up, you know, being really, I guess, awkward in terms of like how the deck flows. But theoretically speaking, you know, you could get, you know, 5 or 6 energies on this Leafeon and then have Superior in play and then do enough damage to KO Pokemon. Definitely seems like kind of a tough strategy to pull off. So yeah, here's Leafeon. I don't know how good it is. We'll have to see. But anyway, definitely some synergy there with Leafeon EX. And we have another Vaporeon. We've yet to get a Vaporeon EX. I believe we've got like 3 or even 4 different Vaporeon cards, which is kind of funny. But this Vaporeon card is quite good. 120 HP as a stage 1 non-EX Pokemon is a good amount of HP. You know, we have Misties, we have Irida, a lot of water type support in the format. We even have Manaphy. But this Pokemon has the attack Hyper Whirlpool for 3 energies, does 70 damage. Flip a coin until you get heads. For each heads, discard a random energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. So this is basically like Guzzlord as, you know, an effect of an attack, but it does 70 damage for 3 energies. Again, water Pokemon, so we can use Misties and stuff. Not a terrible card, honestly. I don't know how good it's going to be. Again, it's really hard to judge the, you know, viability of these Pokemon, you know, before the set releases, but definitely, excuse me, definitely not a terrible Pokemon by any stretch of the imagination, but it's tough to really judge how strong these Pokemon are going to be. But yet again, another Vaporeon. I think we also have like the washout Vaporeon from, was it Mythical Island or something? I forget. And I think we had a couple in the base set. So a lot of Vaporeons are in Pokemon Pocket right now. This card's not terrible, theoretically speaking, but yeah, anyway, there's Vaporeon. And then because Glaceon technically is an Ice-type Pokemon, but there's no Ice-type in Pokemon Pocket, Glaceon is also a water-type Pokemon, and yes, we also have Glaceon EX, which was a card that I was always really interested in, but never really saw that much play. It has an effect where every turn it's in the active spot, you do 10 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon, I think. So it's actually quite cool. I would love to see like a Glaceon deck be relevant in the meta, but anyway, this is going to be the non-EX Glaceon coming out in the set. 100 HP, retreat cost of 2, weak to metal, and it has the attack Ice Blade. For 2 water energies, we can do 50 damage to one of our opponent's Pokemon. So that's actually pretty cool. Theoretically speaking, like with Misty's, we're going second on our second turn. We can do 50 damage to any one of our opponent's Pokemon. You can pair this with the Glaceon EX and maybe do some valuable chip damage to a bench Pokemon, then come in and kind of finish a KO with Glaceon. 100 HP means we are getting KO'd quite easily. Yes, with Giant Cape we can go to 120, but 50 damage to any one of your opponent's Pokemon for 2 energies, 2 water energies, by the way, isn't really that bad. Water energy is pretty easily accelerated with Misty's, with Manaphy. So the water archetypes are interesting in my mind. It is a little bit awkward, of course, with Oricorio running around for most of the water-type decks, but theoretically speaking, Glaceon is an ice-type Pokemon, so neither of them are weak to Electro-type, and, you know, in a Glaceon deck, this could potentially be a decent counterplay to something like an Oricorio. 50 damage is 50 damage, and that's actually quite a bit of damage to a bench Pokemon, so maybe paired with Glaceon, again, some synergy there. That's kind of what we're seeing with these, you know, Evolution cards, is that they kind of synergize with their EX versions. Pretty cool. I actually quite like this card. Again, we just have to wait and see exactly, you know, what other cards come out in the set and how good any of these Evolution decks are, but that is the new Glaceon. And then we also have Jolteon, and of course, I think this is like the 3rd Jolteon we've gotten in Pokemon Pocket. 90 HP, weak to fighting, and it's got beginning bolts, so this is more of an aggressive Pokemon. 1 lightning energy. If this Pokemon evolved during this turn, this attack does 20 more damage. So that's actually not that terrible as an aggressive card. Basically, on our first turn going second for 1 energy, we can do 60 damage. And that is enough to KO basically any basic Pokemon in the game. So in my mind, this might be probably the best Pokemon that we've gotten in Pokemon Pocket going first. Like 60 damage on your second turn going first is really, really strong. And again, we're playing, you know, 4 copies of Jolteon in our deck potentially, just 2 copies of this one and 2 copies of another one. I forget exactly what the other ones do. One has like Pin Missile or something, I forget. But yeah, so honestly, it's not that bad. 60 damage can KO most basic Pokemon in the game. This is going to be a really strong, aggressive, you know, archetype Pokemon here that we can play to basically counteract a lot of these stage 2 rare candy decks that, of course, love to rare candy turn 2 and pop off. That 60 damage will be enough to KO literally, I think, any basic Pokemon that evolves, right, from rare candy, whether it's Charmander or Cosmog or anything like that. So I think it's going to be really an anti kind of rare candy deck Pokemon. I think this has a lot of potential. We could play it with Pokemon Communications to more consistently find our Jolteon on our second turn. We could play it with really anything that draws Pokemon. We could play it with Shiinotic, so I really like it. After that first turn, of course, it's only 40 damage, so this is definitely just a leadoff Pokemon. Not going to be very strong into the late game. We don't have a lot of HP. We're probably going to struggle against Silvally as well. Type Null does live an attack from Beginning Bolt, and then they can just evolve and 1-hit KO you. So yeah, a lot of these Evolution cards are probably going to get countered pretty heavily by Silvally, which is a little bit, you know, disappointing for sure. But I do think that Jolteon actually has some merit. Like I said, I think we don't have enough Pokemon that are strong going first. Theoretically speaking, the best Pokemon going first are going to be stage 1 Pokemon with 1 energy in their attack cost. Jolteon definitely fits that bill. Very, very aggressive, a card that loves to go first, which is cool to see in Pokemon Pocket. So there we go. There's Jolteon. These are all holo cards, by the way. So, you know, it's not going to be like super easy to pull all of them, but anyway, just figured I'd mention that. Next up is Espeon, 100 HP, retreat cost of 1, weak to dark type, and this Pokemon has the Energy Crush attack, which this Pokemon is actually really quite good. 1 psychic energy, 20 damage. This attack does 20 damage for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, this is a little bit similar to like Tapu Lele. However, Tapu Lele can hit any Pokemon on your opponent's board, but this doesn't, you know, scale to just to the energy attached to the Pokemon that we're attacking. It scales to all of the energy attached to all of our opponent's Pokemon. So if you take a look at a lot of the decks in the metagame right now, things like Giratina and Darkrai, of course, like to generate 2 energies on 1 turn. There are some scenarios where Espeon could come in like mid to late game and do a tremendous amount of damage and take a KO pretty easily on the active Pokemon. And I actually quite like this card. It is a stage 1 Pokemon. It only has 100 HP. It is weak to dark, so Darkrai is KOing us pretty easily, but I actually still like Espeon. I think this is a pretty cool card. Again, maybe we are going to be getting like an Espeon EX or a Jolteon EX or Vaporeon EX. We just haven't seen them yet. But either way, like these non-EX evolution cards are all really kind of decent. Like they're really okay. I just don't necessarily know like how good they will be. It's just hard to kind of gauge. But yeah, anyway, Espeon, pretty cool. Has the potential to do a lot of damage for 1 energy, which I do like. But like I said, a lot of these evolution cards are going to be revenge KO'd pretty easily. So yeah, anyway, that is Espeon. And next up, we've got Umbreon, 100 HP as well, retreat cost of 2, weak to grass. And we have the Dark Binding attack. For 1 dark energy, we do 40 damage. And this attack reads, if the defending Pokemon is a basic Pokemon, it can't attack during your opponent's next turn. So this effect seems really strong. I believe we've seen effects like this before. They typically don't see a lot of play in Pokemon Pocket, mainly for the one reason that effects like these do not stick as well as you might think. The main point that I'm making here, and I think a lot of people are kind of comparing this card and thinking, oh, it could, shut down this deck, shut down that deck. Basically, it only works for basic Pokemon, but also if that Pokemon retreats out, they can go to a different Pokemon and then attack you. So again, against things like Giratina and Darkrai, they're setting up 2 Pokemon at the same time. So, even if like a Darkrai's in the active spot, you can attack it, and technically that Darkrai can't attack you, but they can just play Leaf, go into their Giratina, and then attack you and KO you. So the ability isn't that great. Also, against like the Ultra Beast decks like Guzzlord and Buzzwole, they can double pivot, and I believe this effect will work the same way that Buzzwole's attack effect works, where basically if you retreat to the bench and then you come back into the active spot, it wipes the effect off that's currently on that Pokemon, and I think the same thing will happen here. So if we hit a Buzzwole for 40, they can basically use Celesteela or 2 Celesteela or whatever to go to the bench and then come back in on that same turn, and they should be able to attack you, I believe is probably how this effect is going to work. So Umbreon is very interesting, but I think a lot of people maybe don't fully understand, or maybe they do. I'm just sort of trying to clarify it. I don't believe that this ability will be that strong. The Ultra Beast decks have a direct counter to it with Celesteela, and like I said, basically any deck that is playing a way to attack with another Pokemon can just go into that Pokemon and then, KO you there. So I don't think Umbreon is very strong. Also, 40 damage is pretty weak from terms of a damage perspective. This is not going to be as nearly as good of a card as something like Oricorio. There are a lot of basic Pokemon in the game, but like I said, a lot of the basic Pokemon decks have a way around this Dark Binding effect. So I can't really see Umbreon being that strong. Maybe they program it like differently than what I'm expecting, and maybe this effect does stick, but I don't understand. Like, I don't think it would. Like, basically, the way it works is that if a Pokemon goes from the active spot to the bench, it wipes all the effects on that Pokemon, whether it's status conditions or negative effects from any attack or whatever. So the only effects where that doesn't work is when the effect is on the Pokemon that's attacking, which we've seen with like Cramorant and a few other cards in the game, that basically when it attacks, your opponent has to like flip a coin, and then, it doesn't matter which Pokemon they're using. The effect goes to like the Pokemon that's attacking. Umbreon is different. It only affects the Pokemon that you have attacked. So whether they go to a different Pokemon or they go to double pivot out, right, with Celesteela, if they're an Ultra Beast card, then the effect gets kind of wiped off. Basically, it's kind of how this works. So yeah, I know some people were pretty high on Umbreon, but I don't really think it's going to be that good of a card. Just the effects like these don't really do much in Pokemon Pocket, but maybe we get an Umbreon EX to pair with this, and then maybe it's really, really strong. That's sort of maybe what I'm assuming here. Like, a lot of the EX evolution cards, or non-EX evolution cards that don't have an EX card yet, might just get them in the set. Like, I would not be surprised if we get a Vaporeon EX, or a Jolteon EX, or an Espeon, or an Umbreon EX. I really wouldn't be surprised. That way every evolution has an EX card and a non-EX card. I don't know if we have a non-EX Sylveon card in the format yet, but we might be getting one in this set as well. So that's kind of my assumption as to how these decks will function. Again, we can play 2 copies of Eevee and 2 copies of Eevee EX, and then play 2 copies of the Evolution and Evolution EX, and effectively run a 4-4 lineup of these cards in your deck, which is pretty cool. I know the evolution cards are going to be different, so it's technically like a 2-2-2-2 lineup, but from an evolution perspective, they all kind of mix and match together, which does add a lot of consistency to Stage 1 decks, which otherwise really aren't that relevant in Pokemon Pocket. It's really hard to find like a Stage 1 deck that is really good, other than Silvally. I know I say that, like, Silvally is like the one example of like it's probably one of the best cards in the game, but in the entire history of Pokemon Pocket, there hasn't been many strong Stage 1 decks, at least for a while. It's mostly like now rare candy decks with Stage 2 Pokemon or basic Pokemon. So Stage 1 Pokemon do struggle a little bit, but maybe this extra consistency of having Eevee EX and running a 4-4 line will make these cards a bit better. But anyway, that's all of the evolution cards that we've gotten so far. I could be wrong about that. Like, maybe we don't get Vaporeon or Jolteon or Espeon EX and we get just some other EX Pokemon. We'll have to see. We really don't know yet. But it's certainly very interesting to see how these decks are going to flow and function, because it is just a different, I guess, build, or a different kind of strategy to these Pokemon Pocket decks that we've really seen before. We've never had anything like this. We've been able to play like an extra copy of an evolution Pokemon, like Decidueye and the Decidueye decks that played like 2 Decidueye EX and then 1 Decidueye Decidueye, but we can only ever play like 2 copies of Rowlet, which inherently doesn't make it as consistent. So think about literally playing 4 copies of one, basic Pokemon and then 4 copies of an evolution Pokemon. We should always basically be able to get these evolution Pokemon out pretty consistently, whether it's the EX or non-EX version, which is pretty cool. So it might be really strong, maybe not, we'll have to see, but definitely pretty interesting nonetheless. Let's take a look at a few other cards that were shown here. We've gotten Swirlix, Milcery, and then Alcremie. So these are all cards that kind of function together in this sort of new single prize archetype here, meaning non-EX Pokemon archetype. And that's going to be the Sweets Relay attack combo here with Sweets Overload. So I guess we'll just go over the Pokemon. So Swirlix, this is a basic Pokemon. It is going to evolve into, I forget the name of the Pokemon, honestly. But anyway, it does evolve. But anyway, this basic Pokemon, for 1 colorless, it does Sweets Relay. The attack does 10 damage. And if you've used Sweets Relay, or if one of your Pokemon used Sweets Relay during your last turn, this attack does 20 more damage. So on the first turn, you attack with these Pokemon, you're doing 10 damage, but every subsequent turn, we are doing 30 damage. That, of course, isn't much damage at all. However, Milcery, by the way, is basically the exact same thing, 50 HP instead of 60, but also has Sweets Relay. And then I think it all kind of finalizes with like Alcremie. And there might be another Pokemon that has Sweets Overload as an attack. But this reads that this attack does 40 damage for each time your Pokemon has used the Sweets Relay attack during this entire game. So effectively speaking, it is going to be somewhat of a strong counterplay to decks that are a bit slower. Theoretically speaking, you're going to be able to go into any of these basic Pokemon and just start attacking with Sweets Relay. And then if you get like 3 or 4 attacks off, you can then go into Alcremie and kind of sweep your opponent. Now, we have got 80 HP on this thing, so like we have to basically win the game with Alcremie or KO a Pokemon that has all of the energies from your opponent, because like, once you get an attack with Alcremie, even if we're doing 160 or 200 damage, our opponent is just going to KO your Alcremie and then the game's over. So I don't really suspect this particular archetype or this strategy to be that good. It will be pretty funny, especially in the scenarios where the Sweets Relay is able to maybe take 1 KO already. You get 3 or 4 attacks off, and then you go into Alcremie and you can hit for 160, 150, or 200 or whatever it is, and take a KO. That's certainly going to be pretty strong. Again, I don't know like how good it's going to be. This is an archetype that's going to get probably absolutely bodied by Silvally, which is definitely a downside for sure. But these are all single prize archetype Pokemon, so you can, of course, like just tank 1 Swirlix and 1 Milcery, and your opponent will take the KO, and then you can go into Alcremie. But like I said, the prize math doesn't work that well, and your opponent's just probably going to revenge KO you pretty quickly here with Alcremie. But anyway, they did showcase these cards, and again, they all go together in this new archetype, which is kind of funny. So we'll see maybe if there's some extra cards or support or something that can be played with them. It's not terrible. Like, this attack is really strong. It shouldn't be that hard for us to get like 3 or 4 Sweet Relay attacks off. It's just that once we go into Alcremie and we attack, maybe we take a KO, but then like, what are we doing? We're just probably going to get KO'd after that. That's the main downside to a card like Alcremie in my mind. But anyway, there it is. There's like the Sweets archetype, I guess is what it's called. Here's a Flareon, Leafeon. It's the same card, but it's the full art version, so pretty cool. Definitely looks really, really cool. I suspect we're going to get some, rarity cards for the Evolution EX cards, which are probably going to look really cool as well. And then we've gotten 2 trainer cards showcased that are both like Eevee specific, or not both, but one of them is at least. One of the cards that I think some people were kind of interested in was Penny, and this is definitely a very interesting supporter card here. This card reads that you look at a random supporter card that is not Penny from your opponent's deck, and then you shuffle it back into their deck, and then you use the effect of that card that you had just found as the effect of this card. So this is a little bit maybe confusing to some people. This is effectively a card that can be any supporter card in your opponent's deck. You don't know which one. It is completely random. It's not discarding the card or anything. It just sort of pulls it from their deck. Whatever it is, you kind of, the effect of Penny turns into that card's effect, and then it shuffles back into their deck. So, I mean, theoretically speaking, this could be, a third Professor's Research, right? If you get lucky and you draw that from your opponent's deck, it could be like a Sabrina or like a Cyrus, but if, of course, your opponent doesn't have a bench Pokemon or a bench Pokemon with any damage onto it, then the effect ends up not doing anything. You could pull a Mars out from your opponent's deck. There's a lot of different supporter cards. Really, all supporter cards that see play in Pokemon Pocket are good. They're just kind of situational, right? Like, there's not every turn you want to play Sabrina, and not every turn you want to play Cyrus, and not every turn you want to play Mars either. So that kind of makes Penny a little bit inconsistent. There is Giovanni, there is Red. I think that the only scenario that I can see off the top of my head Penny maybe being super relevant is in Silvally decks. Not only will this satisfy the condition for Silvally's Brave Buddy attack, but it could theoretically kind of pull out your opponent's like Glaceon if you're playing like a Sylveon mirror match, which again could be pretty relevant, or you could just grab a research. So it might actually be somewhat good in Sylveon decks if your opponent is oftentimes also playing a Sylveon deck, because it's just another supporter that you can always play, and that effectively is going to be good in Sylveon, but I just don't know if this card's really going to be good in other scenarios like that. Now, you got to also keep in mind that in the early game, this card is very, very inconsistent, but in the late game, it's maybe a little bit more useful in the sense that, you know, imagine maybe late in the game where you're kind of looking to make a decision on your turn based off of what you think is in your opponent's hand, if you don't have Mars or something like that. And you could play Penny and then theoretically maybe get some idea of, you know, a card that's in their deck but not in their hand. Like for an example, like in the late game, your opponent has like 4 cards in their deck. You play the Penny on your turn and it ends up being Cyrus. So you're like, okay, now I know my opponent doesn't have the Cyrus in their hand, they have it in their deck. So maybe it could be valuable to learn some information like that. We do have cards like Looker, which allow you to look at all of the supporter cards in your opponent's deck. However, that's also a supporter, so we cannot play Penny and Looker on the same turn, which inherently, you know, that synergy doesn't really work that well. We do have like hand scope, so we can look at the cards in our opponent's hand before we play Penny. That could be somewhat of a funny combination here. I think Penny is in general pretty inconsistent. I think Pokemon Pocket decks are pretty like pressed for space. There's not a lot of decks that would maybe choose to play Penny over like playing Mars or like a copy of Red or Giovanni as like the 19th 20 card in their deck. So yeah, I don't expect Penny to see that much play. Maybe it ends up being quite good if like every deck plays the same like 3 or 5 supporter cards or whatever. But I think that right now, given the supporter cards that are seeing play, some decks are playing Red, some are playing Giovanni, some are playing Cyrus, some are playing Mars or Sabrina. Those are pretty situational supporter cards, which you don't always want to play. So Penny could definitely end up kind of biting you in the butt or just not really be useful much at all. Or sometimes maybe it's just an extra Professor's Research, which to be honest would be incredibly strong. It's just not always likely that that's going to be the case. So yeah, I don't know. I think Penny's really interesting. I just don't necessarily see it as like a really like top tier kind of meta supporter card. Definitely kind of niche. I think it's better than Looker theoretically because it does something, but I don't know if it's really going to see that much play in decks that aren't Sylveon, and it might not even see play in Sylveon decks, honestly. We'll have to see. Definitely one of the stranger cards that's ever been printed in Pokemon Pocket, I will say. Yeah. And you honestly, you don't know. Like there could be like a supporter card that is specific to Evolutions that every Evolution deck plays, and then maybe playing Penny is really good because it could just act as a way to find that supporter card more often. We'll have to see. Honestly, Penny's a really interesting card to me. It doesn't look like that crazy off the bat just because it's inconsistent, and inconsistent cards don't often see play in Pokemon Pocket. They do sometimes, but I don't necessarily expect that Penny will be like a top tier supporter card, but maybe it does see play. We'll have to see. Definitely interesting. And then last up here, we have Eevee Bag, which is a new item card, which has a choose one effect. Not something I don't think we've seen in Pokemon Pocket before either. So we're getting some new stuff into the game. This is an item card that can do one of 2 different things, and you get to choose. The one option here, the first one, is during this turn, attacks used by your Pokemon that evolve from Eevee do 10 plus damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. This is actually a lot better than people think it is. We have Red in the game, we have Giovanni in the game, which are supporter cards, but this is an item card. So we can effectively use this card twice in one turn and do plus 20 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon with any of our Evolution cards. And then we also, of course, have like Red or Giovanni that you can pair on top of that, potentially boosting the damage that things like Flareon do by 40, which is actually pretty huge. So I think that Eevee Bag is quite good. The second option here is that you heal 20 damage from each of your Pokemon that evolve from Eevee. So it's kind of like a baby Irida. I actually do quite like this card. I think it probably will see play in Eevee decks. I mean, maybe not. Like the Ultra Beast decks don't always play Beastite, which was like their damage modification card. So I think Eevee Bag is a bit better because it's not a tool card, and we already have good tool cards, so people just chose not to play Beastite. This card seems actually quite good. I expect it to see play really in any Evolution deck that, of course, plays multiple copies of an Evolution card. 10 damage is 10 damage, and like I said, if you have 2 of these in your hand, then yeah, that's 20 damage on one turn, plus Giovanni or plus Red. That's going to be enough to take KOs on a lot of different Pokemon in the game right now, and I think that's definitely quite relevant. So yeah, Eevee Bag, I think, is actually pretty good. It's funny because I'm pretty sure that's the backpack that Penny wears, so pretty cool. Anyway, and then we have this image, which is just the normal art version of Sylveon EX. It's or not Sylveon, Sylveon EX. They have similar names, Sylveon EX. So yeah, this is what the normal art looks like. But anyway, guys, there it is. There's Eevee Grove, and that's all of the cards that we've gotten so far from the trailer. We went a little bit in depth here. I know some people, again, are going to have some prejudice against the set here, or I guess, like, you know, preconceived notions as to how good they think these cards are. Again, you know, have an open mind. Understand that basically every mini set that's been announced so far, the cards haven't seemed very good, but then when they come out and we get the full set, they end up being quite strong. The same thing happened with Triumphant Light. The same thing happened with ED Crisis. It's just sort of how it goes. So keep an open mind. I would expect these cards to be quite decent, quite relevant in the metagame, and I think it's really fun, and I think it's going to be a cool inclusion to the meta. Hopefully we get some new archetypes, and again, you know, the cool thing about Evolutions is that they're usually really flexible in terms of how we can build decks, so we should be able to get some really creative strategies and archetypes coming into the format, which I'm really, really excited about. One thing to expect as well is that the format coming up here, the A3B format, is probably going to be quite short, similar to how ED Crisis was very short. So it was literally like less than a month. It was like 24 days long, the ED Crisis format was. And I expect the next format here with Eevee Grove to be also quite short until the next full set comes out, being A4. And yeah, so keep that in mind. The sets are moving quite quickly. I know some people feel pretty strongly about that. But honestly, I think a lot of people probably didn't even collect ED Crisis cards or open a lot of those packs. I think a lot of people were probably waiting for the next set to come out, and I assume from the collector standpoint, but also just in general, people might be a little bit more excited for the Eevee cards. I would love to hear your guys' opinions down in the description below. Again, this is going to be a really fun collector set, but I do actually think there's going to be a lot of really strong meta cards and strategies that come out of this expansion. So I'm really, really excited. I can't wait. I think it's going to be really, really fun. Again, the set releases on the 26th, so we've got about a week until this comes out. I'm sure there's going to be some leaks or some data mines until then, so you guys are going to want to stay tuned for sure. But anyway, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned. Tons of content coming on the channel all of the time. And yeah, there it is, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.